Welcome to The Investigators. I'm Vanessa Murphy, investigative reporter at KLAS TV in Las Vegas. I have Special Agent in Charge Chris Delzotto, FBI Las Vegas. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Vanessa, for having me. I appreciate it.
So you've been in the job about a year here.
About a year, yes.
Your thoughts?
Boy, is it an active city when it comes to our responsibilities. I think it's an interesting city in terms of we see every criminal violation you could possibly imagine, as well as all the national security threats that we also investigate. So I guess diversity is something that I've noticed.
What surprises you about this market?
I think the thing that surprises me, well, actually, the thing I've been most impressed with is, I've been in other AORs, areas of responsibility with other field offices. I think that the law enforcement coordination and partnerships are second to none. I really feel like the local, state, and federal agencies are truly doing it the right way in this state.
So today we're going to discuss 764. 764.
764, yes.
So do we say 764 or 764? What's like the proper?
764.
764. How do you explain what it is?
Sure. So 764 is a generic term for what we at the FBI call the nihilistic violent extremism threat, NVE for short. So NVE, when you kind of peel it apart, is it targets usually minors, folks usually 17 and younger, a lot of times female, online, folks that are vulnerable folks, for example, kids that may have eating disorders or have mental health issues, belong to certain socioeconomic groups. Those people are online, where unfortunately a lot of the threats we work nowadays, it starts online. And those people belong to groups, whether it's mental health groups, eating disorder groups. And the members of 764 or NVEs exploit those associations. They exploit them by building rapport with them through these groups. And then eventually they'll be the victims of these of 764 will be kind of invited into privately held chat rooms on places like Discord or Telegram. From there, they'll be exploited. They'll be what they're looking to do. The actors is gain as much information on the potential victim as possible, and then exploit that and force them to do things that they wouldn't ordinarily want to do. Things like engage in swatting, engage in violent acts, mass shootings, or simply take sensitive images or video of themselves. And so that's generally the rundown of the group and kind of their how they operate.
So is this something more that the FBI or the Department of Justice wants to spread the word about because maybe it's newer and sort of campaigning to get the word out? Or is this something that's already sort of out of control that you're like, we got to get a hold of this and we're really seeing it a lot lately?
So when you use that, I'll kind of pick that apart a little bit. So I wouldn't say it's newer, to use your word. I think nihilistic violent extremism has been around for quite some time. Has it gotten the attention or has it been highlighted as the FBI has highlighted it the last couple of years? I don't know that that's the case, but 764, again, is a generic term. There's a lot of 764 groups that have existed over time.
It's frightening and it sounds more like a movie.
That's an accurate depiction, yes.
Let's take a quick break. Welcome back to The Investigators. I'm Vanessa Murphy, joined by Special Agent in Charge Chris Delzotto for FBI Las Vegas. So we're talking about 764, and you mentioned that the group or individuals may target individuals who are going through something, correct?
Correct.
So does this mean maybe I'm a teen struggling with perhaps an eating disorder and I'm in a Facebook group for that, or along those lines?
Exactly right. And then the criminal actors behind groups known as 764 or NVEs, they prey upon those victims that are trying to get support, or they're vulnerable in certain areas. I think your example is a perfect one. That is what they're targeting. That's where they solicit their victims.
So I'm going to ask you a question. I know that law enforcement is like, it's not like Law and Order, or it's not like this movie. So this question might seem a little bit along those lines. But if you had to, in a way, profile perhaps a 764 member or suspect, is there a common thread?
That's a good question. I think oftentimes what I would refer to as the abusers or the criminal actor, typically over the age of 25, male, certainly interested or may have once been an actual victim of a 764 group, and then that has morphed over time into an abuser that actually seeks out victims. Other than that, obviously, they have an affinity for, gore and violence, an affinity for it, and I think the big thing is their objective is to build status within that NVE group, and they do that by seeing how many victims they're able to lure in, and more importantly, how the egregiousness of what they were able to do, whether it's, things like that they refer to as blood signing. So that's a particularly gruesome thing where they have victims essentially self-harm, where they note the abuser's name or moniker on themselves. That builds notoriety, and for the abusers or the actors, that is one of the main motivations why they're doing this, is they want the status within that group.
Are you seeing this originate on Roblox?
That is one of the avenues that we have seen, yes.
Where are the most common platforms? What are the most common platforms this is starting?
I think it's like we just said, it's a lot of the online I would say support type groups for vulnerable people. There's certainly various, video games that are susceptible to this. So I would say between those two is the bulk of where we see, 764 and groups like it operate in and on.
It's upsetting because sometimes it's hard enough for someone to try to accept that help, or to come forward or connect with someone going through the same thing, go to these groups, and then to think that these groups are being infiltrated. It's like, well, what do you do then?
So the question is, how are the groups infiltrating? I think they're very adept, these criminal actors, these abusers, at spotting somebody that's vulnerable, spotting somebody that's isolated, and yearning for belonging to a group, right? And once they identify that person, they lure them into these private chats where they're exploited further. But the initial lure in is, gifts. They feign a romantic interest, and so that's the initial lure in, and then the exploitation of that person follows.
I want to talk about doxing and swatting when we come back.
Okay.
Welcome back. Special Agent in Charge Chris Delzotto of FBI Las Vegas is joining us. We're continuing to talk about 764. Two aspects I want to mention. you've said swatting is part of this. Can you, for someone who doesn't understand what that is, what is it?
Swatting is essentially calling in some type of threat to law enforcement, and then law enforcement sending a response. So, for example, somebody calls in a 911 call that there's an explosive device when there is no explosive device, and a SWAT team and a hazmat team shows up, and what comes with that is a lot of obvious danger as well as chaos when you have a response like that that's unwarranted.
Yeah. I like a good prank, but something like that is at another level because you're essentially taking resources away from an emergency that
100%.
might need it. How often do we see that here in Southern Nevada?
Swatting?
Yeah, and how often do you think it is related to something like 764?
So the first part of the question is, we see swatting in Las Vegas and we see it throughout the United States, and in the last few years, I think there's a huge uptick when it comes to swatting events around the country. And then the second part of your question was
locally.
Locally, like I said, yeah, we certainly see swatting here in Las Vegas,
and perhaps related to 764.
Yeah. So the actors, the criminal actors, the abusers behind 764, oftentimes they ask their victims to do certain things. One of the things is swatting, for example,
and doxing.
Yes,
that is part of 764.
Absolutely. So doxing is simply putting somebody's personal information out online, and that is one of the many, I would say, practices of groups like 764 to exploit these vulnerable victims by, essentially extorting them by doxing them, putting their information out online.
We don't often see the FBI talk about ongoing investigations, so I'm not going to put you on the spot. But is there anything you can say maybe about a previous case or a case in general here in Nevada related to 764?
I'll just say in general, our office has multiple 764 investigations pending. We have both subjects or abusers located in this state, and we certainly have victims in this state.
And victims and suspects really can range in age.
Absolutely. Range from anywhere from 13 to 25 is typically what we see, and then the actors and the abusers are typically within that range, 13 to 25 or so, and male.
What is the most important point you want a viewer to take away from this?
I think the most important point is recognize what I would call the red flags. So as a parent, right, what can you do? What should you notice? And I think there's a couple things. One is a sudden change in behavior, a sudden urge to talk or comment about suicide. I think the unsafe or not practicing the correct cyber hygiene, so not clicking on links you're unfamiliar with, the arrival of gifts from unknown people, and then obviously the physical evidence, so the cutting and the things you may see on a victim's body.
Okay, we'll take a quick break. Thank you. Welcome back. So we are talking about 764 and what the FBI wants parents, wants the community to know about 764. How did this start, by the way?
Good question. So we believe it started somewhere around 2021. A teenage boy at the time, Bradley Cadenwood, who resided in Texas, who's currently serving an 80-year sentence, we believe is the creator of 764.
What are you doing sort of in the community other than interviews like this to get the word out, maybe education in schools for parents, et cetera?
Well, this is certainly part of the effort, awareness and education. But in addition to engaging with our media partners, we are engaged in extensive outreach with other law enforcement partners, emergency medical services, fire department, EMS, the school districts. And I think that's an important one. Obviously, most of the victims are school age, Clark County being the 5th largest school district, as you know, in the country. We are a target-rich environment for 764 activity. So that kind of outreach, and then also with our mental health providers, knowing, the signs of 764 and the type of things you should be looking out for.
And I just want to make sure I'm sort of understanding this correctly. With 764, the FBI is saying this is a network of individuals, and essentially there are multiple aspects of it, like child abuse, child sexual abuse material, encouraging kids to self-harm, that sort of thing, all kind of encompassed, plus the doxing, plus the swatting. It just seems very complex.
I would say anytime you talk about an international threat that has seen an uptick in growth the last couple of years, and then you mix in all the different criminal threats that you just mentioned, whether it's violent crimes against children, sextortion, doxing, swatting, or in any given case, all of the above, it certainly is complex.
I want to end with some rapid fire questions for parents and kids and guardians in our community. And it has to do with sort of kids' access to the internet, since that is a huge part of this. Okay?
Yes.
All right. Age a kid should have a cell phone.
I would say this is my own personal thoughts, and being a father myself, I don't think my kids are getting a phone until at least high school.
High school?
Yes.
Okay. Even if they say they feel left out?
Yes.
All right.
Sometimes being a parent is tough business, but I think unfettered access to the internet is the main problem here, not just in 764 and violent extremism, but on a lot of the threats we see.
All right. Internet time daily for a kid. And I'm not talking about for brain development. I'm talking about to protect them.
I don't know that. I think it's obviously they shouldn't. My personal view is that they shouldn't have unfettered access is the main issue. I don't know that it's the time allotment per se, but it's more so about the supervision of what our children are viewing and participating online.
Should kids be playing games like Roblox?
I think that video games obviously are something that kids, especially nowadays, are more interested in than ever. I think you have to stay away from a lot of these private chat rooms, know who your kids are communicating with, or limit any type of communications through a lot of those video games, because we do not know, parents or the kids playing the games, who is behind the keyboard.
Should we have sort of like the junior Alexa? Of course, I can't remember the name of it right now, but you know what I'm talking about. Should that be in a kid's room? Or
you're talking about internet
like an Alexa,
of things, like where they could ask certain questions to the internet. Again, I think it goes back to my comment earlier about unfettered access to online. So that's not just a child's laptop or iPad. It's all Internet of Things, so Alexa included. Okay.
So no cell phone till high school. I'm going to remember that one. I may be asking for my own parenting here. But anything else you want to add in our conclusion?
No. Well, one thing, we put out a lot of public service announcements. I think ic3.gov is a great avenue to educate yourselves and your children about what we're seeing in this space. We have some great partners in the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC, that puts out a lot of material. So I think between those two avenues, you could really educate yourselves on the signs to look for and protect your children.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And thanks for joining us.